This is Alistair Arkhart, a friendly jock living in Aberdeen. Unfortunately, it's the 1920s, so life sucks. As a kid, he was forced to partake in the long British tradition of child labour, working on fishing boats and farms. He becomes strong and resilient, which is actually quite lucky for him, because the series of events that would take place in his life required a lot of grit. But Al would become one of the unluckiest individuals during the world's unluckiest time, World War II.
We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
In the early 40s, Al, still a teenager, decided to enlist in the Gordon Highlanders, and in no time at all, he was shipped to Southeast Asia to defend British-held Singapore. It was hot, humid and uncomfortable. The tough upper brass were wankers, which made an already hard situation just a little bit worse.
To report you to the International Federation for Ethical Naturalism.
And to top it all off, it was 1942, and the Japanese were surrounding Singapore. Not to worry though, Winston Churchill had assured everyone that the island of Singapore was a fortress, with a water defence around it that he called his splendid moat.
That is the resolve of His Majesty's government.
It was manned by 85,000 multinational troops. I mean, sure, a sizable percentage of them were non-combatant personnel, but hey, when has the British top brass ever been wrong? It collapsed in just over a week. Al went from being a soldier to being a prisoner. And being a POW to the Japanese in World War II was pretty much worst case scenario. No. Still exhausted from the battle, Al was forced to partake in a death march. These would soon become the one consistent in his life. Leaving the city they had called home, they walked straight into the horrid sweatbox of a Southeast Asian jungle. His friends and brothers would die around him as he was forced by tip of a bayonet to keep moving forward. Al would spend hours on the march daydreaming about Scotland and wishing he could taste a cold, zesty iron brew for just one more time. Eventually, Al and the remaining multinational prisoners made it to Death Railway, the now infamous construction project led by the Japanese Empire, building a railway from Thailand to Burma. He was quickly put to work. The work was intense, the humidity was harsh, tens of thousands of people would die on this project, and Al almost became one of them. He suffered from malnutrition and cholera, all when being tortured by his captors. But he pushed on, building, sleeping, dreaming of iron brew. Each day blurred into the next. Insects ate him alive. Men would collapse next to him and never get back up. Disease spread like wildfire. The food was about as good as the food you'd get at a British seaside town. For over 700 days, Al pushed on. His years of child labour really came in clutch, as he somehow managed to stay on his feet, deal with the beatings, and make a goddamn railway. After an agonising stint in the jungle, the Japanese decided it was time to move on. Things were heating up in the war and Japan needed coal miners. So it was time for another death march. They marched him back through the same jungle he had already walked through, all the way back to Singapore. Again, many died. The march was dreadful, but Al just kept going. It was strange coming back into Singapore, his old stomping grounds. So much had changed, and his mind couldn't help but wander back to his time as a soldier defending this land. Even Mr. Toffee, hook-nosed, top-brass Englishmen with their posh private school accents.
But a strong chin and a set of khakis.
This was no sightseeing trip though. He had no time to ponder and reminisce. He was put to work on the docks in direct sunlight, still suffering with malnutrition. It just seemed like the hardships were never going to end. But the Empire needed him back on the Japanese mainland. So it was time for... In 1944, he was crammed into a hell ship, named the Karachi Dokimura, an old, captured American cargo ship transporting hundreds of POWs, well over its design capacity limits. The Japanese didn't bother stocking it with supplies needed for such a voyage, so as always, the suffering was immense.
Whoops.
Dehydration entered the lobby. An agonising thirst took over the whole ship. Crammed in like sardines in the burning South China Sea heat, conditions quickly became miserable. Food would hardly reach all the prisoners, and it's alleged that some resorted to cannibalism in order to stay alive, eating the bodies of their fellow detainees. This was a low point, even for a Scottish man from the 1920s. On the 12th of September 1944, Al woke up to another miserable day on board the hell ship. He had another day of sweating, suffering, and dying of thirst to look forward to. But just as he got to his feet, boom. A deep thud was heard from the depths of the ship. All the POWs were knocked off their feet, and the ship groaned and roared in a horrifying symphony of twisted metal and pressure. Fire immediately entered the hold. Al was burnt, but a bigger concern was the fact water had quickly begun to pool around his feet. The ship had been hit by a torpedo fired from a US submarine, and it was sinking. The Japanese made no attempt to rescue the POWs from their hold, and before Al could think, he was neck deep in water. Through a sea of broken metal, oily water and screaming bodies, Al managed to make his way through the ship's inner gubbins to the surface of the ocean. He had swallowed so much oil his vocal cords would be permanently damaged. In great pain, Al managed to find a small life raft. He climbed in and looked back at the horrors unfolding. Over 400 POWs went down with the ship. A lot of Al's friends, who had survived since the fall of Singapore, met their end that day. He curled up into a ball and floated away. The sun beamed down on an exhausted Al. He had no ability to catch food or find water. All he could do was endure and carry on. The only escape was the peace and quiet. After years of being shouted at by his captors, just being able to sit in silence felt calming. But it wouldn't last. By day 3, the pain of sunburn, dehydration and hunger was just consuming his entire body. He didn't even have the energy to daydream about Irn-Bru. His little island home in the UK felt like a universe away, and with each day it felt even more unlikely he would ever see it again. On day 5 he was barely able to sit up. The salt in the ocean water mixed with the sunburn had cracked his skin, creating painful sores. Still, he pushed on. Al just never thought of giving up. Even if that just meant staying awake, that's what he would do. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, a huge ship appeared next to him. The horn's blast filled him with adrenaline. He was about to be rescued. But, to his horror, he saw the writing on the side of the ship. It was a Japanese whaling vessel. He knew that meant he would be taken back to his captors. After a few days of sailing, they made it back to the Japanese mainland. They dropped him off with the military. Hydrated and fed by the captors, he had a bit more energy, and he was going to need it, because it was death march time. The Empire still needed coal. The tide of the war was truly turning against them by now, and they needed that black gold to fuel their ever-dwindling war machine. He was marched all the way to Ozone Mining Company and immediately put to work in dangerous mines. Back-breaking labour followed. Al's body was so beat up by this point, only basic medical care had been given to him to keep him on his feet. Once again, men died all around him. His entire day was hitting rocks with pickaxes. The conditions were miserable. Just when he felt like he couldn't take it anymore, the Japanese decided to move him again. Rumours flooded the site that the Americans and the Russians were closing in on Japan. Al couldn't help but feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But for now, it was time for another death march. This time across the Japanese countryside. This was becoming almost routine for Al. He knew the score, one foot in front of the other, and he would make it. He wondered to himself where the Japanese were going to take him this time. What brutalities laid ahead of him. I guess only time will tell. So he was sent to a labour camp around 10 miles from Nagasaki Central. Great. The conditions were still rough, but were much better than they had been. He toiled away in fields day after day, still daydreaming about Scotland and Irn-Bru. That was until the 9th of August 1945. By a stroke of luck, Al was working outside the small huts that were dotted around the camp. Unlike many others, he stopped to listen to a drone of a plane in the distance, wondering where that plane had been. Then, a bright light filled his entire sight. In a daze, he raised his hand to block it, but just then, he was hit with a horrific shockwave. It blasted him from his feet. All around him he could see the small huts completely fold and break apart. The wind tore through the camp, and dust once again obscured his view. When everything settled, he could hear screams of pain all around him. As his eyes adjusted, he saw burnt and severely injured people. Al himself had burns and cuts all over his body. He also had radiation exposure.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the...
But didn't understand what that was at the time. He stated that he had never seen such destruction, even during his time on the battlefield. By the time he and the other POWs got their shit together, they noticed that the Japanese guards had fled, taking almost all of the medical supplies. He and the least injured spent the next few days tending to scores of victims. Many would die. They had no idea that at this point the war was over. And they were surprised when US servicemen and first aid teams strolled into the camps. He could not believe it. His plight was over. He was severely malnourished and suffered from disease and exhaustion. But he was alive. He would be transported back to the UK, where he would receive a big Scottish welcome.
Chicken shit bastard. What you fucking prick?
Albie and Al just didn't talk about all he had been through. Like many of his generation, he didn't feel the need to discuss his experience. It wasn't until much later in life, when he was in his 80s, did he decide to finally open up, writing a memoir called The Forgotten Highlander. Then the whole world found out what an absolute top lad this guy was. On November 7th, 2015, at 97 years old, he passed away, even beating the odds of the radiation he had received. He never gave up, and didn't think to mention it.